So here we are, Stephanie Lepp. Um, Firstly,
Yeah.
congratulations are in order
Thank
because,
you.
yeah, you just had your TED Talk about your project Faces of X just went live on Friday, a couple of days ago.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Great. And it's excellent. Everyone should check it out. I watched it earlier today. It's really good. Really,
Thank you.
I really admired your ability to really condense, some pretty complex ideas very simply. Let's just get a little framing of what was the talk about.
Yes. So the talk it was a combination of, it started with a live performance of Faces of Capitalism, which is part of my Faces of X video series, which we'll be talking about. And then I gave a talk about kind of the thinking behind the series, which is about integrating different perspectives into a bigger picture of reality.
Awesome. And so tell us a little bit about the project. There's quite a few things because sort of moving beyond polarization has been such a big part of my work and interest for years. We've talked about that a lot. Talk about maybe how the project came about, like, and a bit more about what is Faces of X and what was it doing? What were you doing before the TED Talk with it?
Yes. So Faces of X. So basically, yeah, the internet often gives us these binary choices, right? Pro-vax or anti-vax, pro-life or pro-choice, woke or anti-woke. And choosing one or the other leaves us with a very partial view, right? Vaccines shouldn't be taken always, nor should they be taken never. So the question isn't really pro-vax or anti-vax, but under what circumstances should vaccines be taken? Similarly with abortion, you know, at least most Americans don't actually identify with just like purely pro-choice or pro-life and favor, abortion rights with some limits. And on wokeness, we could say that the frame of oppressor and oppressed is critical and historically overdue, and not always the most relevant frame with which to see a given situation. And so, how do we kind of transcend that binary thinking, but without devolving into both sidesism? You know, where we like where we present both sides as equally valuable or relevant. Well,
We agree to
Faces of X's,
disagree, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, but without actually like getting into the complexity of it. It's just kind of an assumption that all sides are equally relevant or valuable. And so Faces of X is one answer to this question of how do we transcend the binary thinking. It's a series of short videos that integrate different perspectives on culture war issues like gender, abortion, and race, keeping it light. And the format is very simple. I use the framework of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So it's the thesis and the antithesis are going back and forth, kind of steel manning the different sides. And then synthesis walks in. All three are played by the same person, but then synthesis walks in and attempts to articulate kind of an integrated perspective that weaves together their insights. So, yeah, and the series stars, I can say the series stars cultural influencers who are kind of known as independent thinkers on these issues, like Liv Boeree, who's been on Kainos in Faces of Capitalism, Buck Angel in Faces of Gender. But ultimately, Faces of X is not really about the individual issues, right? It's ultimately about cultivating our capacity to integrate different perspectives and see politics and ultimately, reality with greater complexity and depth.
Yeah, and it feels to me like, a big part of what we were doing on Rebel Wisdom, sort of in when did we start? So 2017 through to 2022. Really, the height of the culture wars, I would say, was bringing practices from the wisdom traditions and psychology and the personal growth worlds into political conversations. I'm still doing that. I still do that regularly. But one thing I've felt in the last, I don't know, 6 months is that the polarization has increased somehow. And now it's very difficult to say because I'm getting this, as we often do, from online, noticing things online. Like, for example, um uh, a clip of Yanis Varoufakis, the economist, who was a
Right.
guest on Leviathan, has
Yeah.
done really well on Instagram and TikTok. It's approaching like 3 million views. So every
Wow.
day I'm getting like comments about it's Varoufakis talking about changing the banking system to cut out the ability of private banks to create wealth.
Uh-huh.
And I would say 90% of the responses are the same two polarities. One is
Uh-huh.
you can't centralize things because if you do that, then you put all the power in the hands of the government,
Yeah.
and government is bad. It's very kind of libertarian style, kind of
Right.
quite American, I would say. I think that that feeling exists in other places, but it's very, very strong in America. And
Uh-huh.
then the other side is like is some version of yes, we should do this.
Uh-huh.
I would actually say that the polarity mainly sits in the rejection side of it. So
Yeah.
my perspective might be a little bit colored by that, but it's not just that. It's some sense of feeling that the polarization is has intensified in kind of a weird way. Do you have that feeling at the moment? I don't know. Like, how are you experiencing stuff?
So it's really hard to know because of, are you familiar with the concept of the perception gap? There's
Mm,
been research that we often think that our opponents are more extreme than they actually are. So on some level, we're kind of like fighting with mirages. Like we actually don't know how much we agree. And the incentives are stacked against us. Obviously, the social media business model that's designed to maximize engagement, therefore drives outrage, etc. So it's like we actually might agree much more than we realize, which is also evidenced in some ways by maybe like the different experiences that we have online and offline. Although obviously, of course, people treat each other differently offline when they're face to face than online. But in terms of the polarity, I mean, the just the a polarity, formally, a polarity is a set of opposing values that need each other to exist, right? So what would be individual freedom without collective responsibility? They actually give each other meaning, or tradition and progress, or life and choice, or centralization and decentralization. So it's like we've like divided ourselves exactly right down the middle on these. The idea isn't to choose one or the other, right? The idea is to hold both in dynamic equilibrium, but we've like divided ourselves right down the middle on all these. So I like to joke that we're just a happy marriage waiting to happen.
I think, yeah, and I think so. And there's something I think about this a lot because I often wonder, is there something inherent to the human psyche, and perhaps particularly amplified in the Western mind, that moves towards black and white thinking in that way? Cognitive behavior therapy often is trying to help us to move beyond that black and white thinking. Alan Watts actually has a great book, kind of hard to find, that he wrote with a Chinese scholar about the Tao Te Ching and about Taoism. It's called Tao, the Watercourse Way.
Mm.
And it's great because it really looks at the Chinese language very deeply. It's a beautiful book. I really recommend people check it out. But one of the things he points out is that, you know, in Chinese, the idea that a flower goes with a bee
Uh-huh.
it's embedded in the language. So there isn't this sense of this
A flower in
disparate thing.
isolation.
Yeah, there's an isolated flower and there's a bee because there's no flowers without bees and vice versa. And so
Mm-hmm.
I forget what the word is, but he kind of loosely translates it as like goes with. And we
Uh-huh.
don't have that construction in English. Doesn't mean we're not
Uh-huh.
able to think like that,
Yeah.
but I do often wonder whether our language itself and also the way we've been trained to think. I think we can untrain ourselves in that way. But
Yeah.
but maybe talk about like what have you noticed when people have done Faces of X? Like what place do they get to with it?
Well, if I can actually just speak to what you just said real quick.
Mm.
First, the way that you say this is so, I hadn't thought about it in this way, but the way you say hummingbird in Portuguese is beija-flor, which means flower kisser. So its
Oh,
name is like in relationship. Yeah,
love it,
which I
love
hadn't
it.
thought of it that way. But just real quick on the, I think for what it's worth, black and white, I think, is part of the developmental process. It's like we start with black and white, and then we make gray, and we don't necessarily want to collapse everything into gray because that would just turn two shades into one. We want black, white, and gray, right? And then obviously like the infinity of colors on the spectrum. But I feel like Disney has gone through a similar evolution. I have kids, so I happen to be tracking. It's like once upon a time, the stories were, it was like a good guy and a bad guy, right? And it was just black and white. And then comes like Frozen and Moana, and spoiler alert, well, I won't say which movie it is, but the bad guy is actually the good guy without her heart. Her heart was stolen from her.
Mm.
And so and that gets, and the stories just kind of continue, but going off the postmodern deep end, it's like we run the risk of turning everything into gray. And actually I think that's a fine stop along the way. But so I'm okay with starting with black and white. It's like my kids, it's like you must wear your seatbelts. Like maybe there are some circumstances, but I'm not going to talk about those circumstances right now. Right now, it's just going to be a black and white, and then we can make it gray, and then we can go from there. So I'm not. I guess I have more. I have faith in the evolution of our consciousness to go from black and white to gray to beyond. But your question, you had asked, what was your question? Remind me your
Let me
question.
just jump in there and then get to
Yeah,
that question, because I think that this
yeah,
is a really key point as well, which is that there is a there is a something very unsatisfying when we reach a position which is gray, right? Even the color gray, that we call it gray, of course, mixed with black and white, but it's very telling because there is a lack of life force in it, because there's a lack of dynamism. There's no challenge, and it feels like there has to be this really deep nuance in these conversations. And this is something I've noticed with facilitating conversations like this. The temptation can be into I also believe everyone is right from a perspective, and simultaneously I believe one person is more right than the other. They
totally.
both coexist like that, and you kind of you speak to this in your TED talk. You're
Mm.
talking about this kind of multi-dimensional perspective, and that to me seems like a way of being more than something we do, right? Like it's a way that we experience the world, that we're able to hold a certain level of complexity. Which, I mean, how does that land with you as an idea?
Yeah, I do think that at a certain point you could just shift gears at will. Right? You could just say, hey, you know what, in this context, I'm just going to shift into gray gear because I'm like getting too attached or feeling like too certain or something. So I don't know if that's what, but that seems like that would be a really um, useful capacity to be able to kind of like shift into different gears based on what you're trying to do or how you're trying to relate to what you're trying to understand.
Yeah. And like you
Yeah.
described the example with your kids, it's like you're aware that there is a wider context to something like wear your seatbelt, for example, right? That one's a little bit trickier because you probably just should wear your seatbelt. But let's
But
say,
but but it's like if we're going up the driveway, like there actually are situations where you don't
right.
have to, but I'm not gonna let you know that yet. I'm gonna
Yeah,
let you like we're gonna discover that together over time. And then
but
my
you're
kids will
aware.
come back to me and be like,
Yeah.
well, you said that. I mean, this is gonna come back and bite me in the ass because I'm gonna be like, you can't drive drunk, and then my kids are gonna be like, well, let's get a car that I can sleep in, and then so I can pull in, and then they can like stay out on, whatever. But like that's part of this is like getting clear about yeah, the contextual, elements here, and
Yeah.
so that our understanding of this thing can expand. Yeah.
And I think that can happen in conversation around polarizing topics, because I mean it's sort of a maybe a more psychologically or more trauma informed approach. And I say trauma informed with a lot of caveats. I've written a piece about how overused I think that concept is. That's a great example there, right? And
Yeah.
yet it's also
Yeah.
useful in context
Totally.
where you could, like the sort of the rationalist communities where it becomes all very like, right, well, you just have to logically kind of make the rational argument and that's going to work. We know that doesn't work, right? Because these are deeply, Jonathan Haidt's pointed this out. It's like if you feel this attachment to an idea or position, you're actually in the territory of emotional understanding with someone, as well as intellectual understanding. But they're both, and I would say the emotional side of it is really profound, and that's the place I usually will begin with. And that means sometimes not saying the thing that you think is true because it's not the right
Mhm.
time. There's so much sort of nuance in all of this. But you've had people sit down and do Faces of X. So you've had them do the thesis position, the antithesis, and then the synthesis. Like when people have done it, what have they noticed? Like what are the kind of things that they're saying?
Yeah.
What have you noticed?
So it's so funny. So this has almost been in a way like therapeutic for this in a way that none of us obviously predicted. But a lot of the like for the stars who have the stars of these different they themselves had a little bit of like a schizophrenic kind of relationship with they didn't know where they and couldn't quite kind of it's like but there's this side but then there's this side so it was almost like a very clarifying and therapeutic process to like really inhabit the different positions and then come out the other end with something that is more comprehensive that now they can use, in their work, their kind of more expanded understanding or articulation of their position. And so, yeah, I mean, I think this is a very helpful practice, this is partially what steel manning is about, right? It's like inhabiting, like in good faith, the other perspective. But yeah, I highly encourage it as a practice. I mean, Faces of X in and of itself, um, I also kind of like positioned it as something that could be used in the classroom. And I have heard from teachers around the world who have assigned, students to watch the series and then write their own script for an issue that they're wrestling with. I actually just posted yesterday. I asked one of the teachers, I was like, can I watch one of these videos? And so
Wow.
she shared one with me, and I just posted it on my Substack, Faces of Prisons, starring Barbie and Ken. But
That's good.
yeah, which was very cool. But yeah, I think it's a great, it's easy enough to think you understand the other side, but to actually get in there and really like articulate it in good faith, and then like find the nuggets in there for you to incorporate into your own perspective, I think is a great practice.
Mm. Yeah,
And
it's
part of
really
what we'll be
smart.
doing tomorrow in the wisdom session.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So basically so there's a few things like how do you avoid falling into that gray area, right? Once we get to a synthesis, we have the thesis, antithesis, synthesis. How do we make sure that the synthesis is, like you say in the TED Talk, something more three-dimensional, where it's
Yeah.
both and neither or, instead of a kind of, oh well, this bit's true and this bit's true, and so there's a kind of like, so what are some tips for that?
Yeah, it's almost more like multiplication than addition. Um,
Mm.
yeah, so the the way that I would distinguish, so that would be both sidesism, right? Both sidesism assumes that all sides are equally relevant or valuable, and maybe we all have a partial truth, like you were just saying, but one of our some of us are more partially right, or just have more, like, the metaphor that I like to there are so many metaphors that are useful in this context, but one of them I think is ingredients. So if you're baking a cake, it's like not all ingredients are equal. It's like you really need eggs. You don't really need vanilla extract. It's like, thank you, vanilla extract. We're really grateful for you, but like, check yourself. You're just the vanilla extract. How do you know? I mean, because the cake tastes good, because the cake is like delicious and it helps you do what you want to do. If you put the equal quantity of every single ingredient, that would not taste like a cake. So I guess it also the rubber meets the road in what you're trying to do. Ultimately, sense making and service of choice making. Like, did the thing you come up with, was that helpful? Did it speak to, I mean, one test is, did it speak to a larger ideological diversity of people? That's one, but the ultimate is also like, did it help you more do the thing that you were trying to do?
Yeah, and this is something I'm thinking about a lot in Leviathan, in the documentary I released about 6 weeks ago. One of the guests, Josh Fry, who hosts the Emerald podcast, he makes a point about the necessity of taking our ideas, our ideologies, our concepts about the world, and actually testing them through what he calls the cultural body. So a sense of like, does it actually work? Does it work to run things in this way? Let's test it out, right? Instead of it
Mm-hmm.
being sort of trapped in an abstract, well, maybe kind of world. And that feels to me like the kind of, a carry on from what you're talking about. It's like, when we reach some kind of synthesis together, and often I think we can feel this excitement of like, oh, that's a new idea, and
Yeah.
there's a kind of, and in fact there's a great book called Strategic Intuition by William Duggan, where he makes the argument that all creativity is a new combination of two existing ideas that
Huh.
unconsciously your brain puts together and then shoots into your conscious awareness as an aha eureka moment, like oof. And I think we've all had those moments where it just feels like, oh yeah, that is exciting. And he says the next stage is carrying it through. You've got to
Uh-huh.
actually enact it into the world in some way. That's a lot trickier though, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's a lot trickier to do, but for me that's really exciting as a prospect.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that also just harks back to, I mean, many wisdom traditions. I mean, the one that I'm most familiar with is Judaism, but tell the story of creation as a story of, I mean, I think even evolutionary biology tells this story, but it's a story of alternatingly like creating new ingredients and recombining them in new ways, and then creating new ingredient and it's just alternate, like separation and reintegration into greater and greater and more complex wholes. So there's a way in which, yeah, like this is mimicking that process.
Yeah, definitely.
We are in the noosphere, like we're taking different, Peter Lindbergh calls it idea sex. Taking different, yeah, and like creating something new. Yeah.
And yeah, and that for me, what that brings up is the importance of holding our ideas lightly and noticing. But this is where the psychology comes in, because if we notice we can't let go of an idea, or there is something that is too important to let go of, sometimes that's just because it's sacred to us, right? And that's all good. But I think it's all really an interesting place to look, because you know often that means it's really wrapped up in a need. Like, this needs to be true because it
Yeah.
defines me in a certain way. And if someone tries to take that away from me, then I'm going to be in defense. And it's a really useful thing to notice that and think, oh,
Yes.
wow, there's a big charge for me around this topic. I've got a bunch of them. And, I've had to really, sometimes it takes years. Sometimes this has taken
Hmm.
me. And there's topics I haven't written about for years, and then started writing about when I felt I was not too angry.
Uh-huh.
It's like quite
Yeah.
an important thing, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's important to know that about yourself. And even, I mean, synthesis itself, I should mention, like that it can be weaponized too. It's like if I want to convince you of something that's center left, I make center the thesis, left the antithesis, and then presto, So, but we just have to kind of keep our wits about us. Like some perspectives are inherently unintegratable, right? Like vaccines never and vaccines always do not play well with any other perspective. So those, and then there's other perspectives that we can just say are morally unwelcome. Like a meaningful synthesis on race isn't between anti-racism and racism, right? It's between the kind of anti-racism proposed by Ibram X. Kendi and the color blindness proposed by Coleman Hughes, something like that. So we have to be discerning, about which perspectives we're integrating and how to frame the sides of the debate. But then obviously the question is like, well, how do we know? How do we know that we're not kind of deluding ourselves? I mean, there's no foolproof way. We have to have epistemic humility and just keep reminding ourselves that the map is not the territory. However detailed is not the territory. And I think this does come back to, the kainos inquiry and just what you're talking about. Like it's helpful to maintain a contemplative practice. It's helpful to, like meditation or prayer, it's helpful to just keep us in some way tethered to the infinite complexity that we can never understand, right? As a way to like keep ourselves all humble and just like making sure, to the extent that we can, that we're not using synthesis to kind of fool ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I think really well said. And it's yeah, that's also why I think nature, an encounter with nature. And I wrote recently, yesterday, about the sublime, this moment where we encounter something so vast, like the night sky, looking up at the Milky Way, or a beautiful, like, but also terrifying mountain or a storm. It reminds us that our attempts to make sense of the world um, are limited, and that
Yeah.
can be a really, really important, um, I think, route to epistemic humility. It's just this
Yeah.
kind of
It,
contextualizing.
and something to also be grateful for. It's like it's not all up to me, and thank God. Like it really should not should not be all up to me. So like I do my little part, I do my limited part, and like, surrender the rest to higher power.
Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful. So in our last sort of maybe 10 minutes or so, I wanted to also talk about two things. I wanted to invite any questions, and there's some great comments coming. Annoyingly, Substack's UX for seeing comments is not amazing, so we can try our best. But if hold off on them now if you have a specific question for Stephanie. But I wanted to just talk about the next project, or another project you're working on, the anti-debate, which we're going to
Oh,
be
yes.
collaborating on
Yes.
soon on Kainos. Interesting to get a sense of like how it relates to what we've just been talking about. Like, but what is the anti-debate, and what's
Yeah,
the
it relates very well. I mean, it's basically taking everything we've been talking about and applying it to the format of a debate. So the question, the kind of initial question being, what if a debate was focused less on one person defeating the other person and more on everyone gaining a more comprehensive view of the topic of debate, right? Because wouldn't it be nice if we all walked away from a debate having learned something, getting a more expansive view of what the debate was about? And so I have been I've been researching different modalities: Socratic dialogue, Havruta, which is a uh, Talmudic study, Bohemian dialogue. There's so many different modalities. So I've been kind of like looking around at what's, what we've invented thus far, and honed it down to a format that actually I can explain it very simply. It actually starts like a traditional debate with opening statements and rebuttals. But then it goes further, right? The idea is like, thank you, debate, for helping to crystallize the different positions. But we don't want to stop there. Right now we have the ingredients, right? Now we get to make something with them. So then comes, I don't know how detailed we want to be, but then comes a process of exploring how the two participants might integrate their different perspectives into some kind of bigger picture.
Mhm.
And I'm making it available to the world. My target audiences are podcast hosts and educators primarily, because right now, when you want to engage different perspectives, what's the main tool you have to use is debate. And so I would love to offer an alternative tool that has the benefits of debate, but also kind of goes further.
Yeah, awesome. And we should give a shout out to our friend Peter
Peter
Limber, who,
Lambert.
yeah, who came up with
Yes.
this and idea, and also, the open source nature of it, which really excites me because, the modalities I've been using in this, one of them is this practice of inquiry, which is kind of a talking meditation that comes originally from the diamond approach, which is sometimes called Ridwan tradition. And it's an incredible practice because you're speaking, and as you're speaking, you're paying attention to what is happening as you're speaking, and so it's really, they use it as and it is a very deep practice of self-inquiry. And when you add in a political question to it, it becomes all, even more deep. And then, for example, another thing that I found really cool is Skylar Brown, who's a great facilitator, who's actually been on Kainos not so long ago as well. She and Peter, actually, again,
Yeah.
Peter's still a dawn in this area,
Yeah.
came up with this process of cultural embodiment, where she
Mm.
plays a controversial media clip. And the one I did with her, it was a clip from the film What is a Woman, that came out a few years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh,
then everyone watches this, 2 or 3 minute clip, and then nobody gives their take on it. Everyone just expresses what's happening in their bodies and
yeah,
what's happening emotionally and what they're noticing. It's a beautiful process because
totally.
there's different sides of the debate, but you can't tell
Yeah.
who's on the side.
I would love to see someday in my dreams, like our news anchors would be doing that. So they're talking about some heavy stuff. It's like, yeah, you're probably feeling that in your throat or in your chest somewhere. But like let's help us emotionally process this stuff too. Um, but yes, hat tip to Peter. And I think the anti-debate name originated with William McCaskill, the founder of effective altruism. But it's been kind of this meme that has been kind of percolating, and Perspectiva has done some work with it, and I've been playing with it. But yeah, I should. What I've been up to is like, may a million anti-debate flowers bloom, and I'm offering one. And to clarify, anti-debate is not anti-debate, which is part of what but I just wanted to work it in the meme that was already kind of
Yeah,
bubbling up.
that makes perfect sense. And it's one of these things where whoever spends the time doing, like you say, you're looking at different practices, you're kind of creating a stack. I think it's wonderful. And so yeah, we're going to be doing hopefully a lot of it on Kainos starting in September, and kind of bring it in for anyone who
And
wants
if
to
you
get.
have requests for topics or guests,
Yeah, that's another thing to
yeah,
put in the chat. So
love
in
to
the
hear
last
that.
few minutes, it would be cool to try our best to see if there's any questions for Stephanie around these topics. It really, I don't know whether it's the way I've set up my thing, but I don't know if
I
we have the
only
same
see
thing.
it, it's
I
like
see like the
a
first thing. So what we'll try and do, or if you have suggestions for topics, an anti-debate topic, that would be really useful, I think, for us to see, because that might well be the thing we choose to do, on Kynos as well. But while we're waiting for that, what other things have you got cooking, Steph,
oh,
in the
infinity.
pipeline?
I think we both share the, living in a semi-permanent state of creative anguish because there's
Yeah,
just so much more that we want to create than we have the capacity to. But yeah, on the infinity, one, and we've talked about this. I'm happy to share it. One that is feels like it's like starting to get feel urgent. Is the story of the evolution of the masculine feminine polarity since from all the way when it started, which is like in eukaryotic bacteria, right? Like this polarity emerged a long time ago. So like through bacteria, plants, animal, then people, you know, through, then human beings, like then we went through some dark times, and but then all the way from pre-human to post domination. I don't know if you're familiar with Rihanna Eisler's work. She's done some really
very
beautiful work kind of articulating the like what happens when we move beyond like one of the sexes oppressing or dominating the other one, and we live in a society where men and women can be powerful together. So I'd love to tell that the entire arc of that
beautiful.
story as a
Beautiful.
film.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a friend who's helping Rianne get her archives all together. She's in her
Oh,
early, well, she's like, I think 93. But sharp. And yeah, I'm a big
totally.
fan of The Chalice and the
I'm
Blade, which was,
amazed. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, really cool. And so it's a
Have
good
her on
question there.
Kainos, maybe.
Yes, that is the plan. But I also want to do a piece on a kind of similar topic and looking at that kind of cultural level. So one question from Pete, which is or kind of comment, but I think is a good one, uh, is around religious belief. How
Hmm.
how do you navigate um these kinds of conversational practices when the beliefs are deeply held, metaphysical structures?
Yeah. So I think that probably goes back to, some perspectives are inherently unintegratable. It's like if you, I guess within the context of an anti-debate, if you are holding a belief, like rigidly and fundamentally, you just really won't be able to play ball. You'll be asked to steel man the opposing view, and maybe you'll just have a really hard time doing it, or you won't be able to do it. So it just kind of filters for slash cultivates or elicits, like you were saying, a capacity to hold lightly, which is not to say that, which is absolutely not to say that you can't hold some things very rigidly. Like something I really admire about my husband, he, in a day and age where you can kind of like choose your ideas about anything, like choose your religion. Like there are some things, and I mean, I would say this is true for me too, but that I've just decided not to choose. It's like the Ten Commandments are not up to me. I was commanded, and I will
Mhm.
obey. So you can still consciously choose to hold to just have hold things rigidly, but just make sure that is a conscious choice rather than like a knee jerk reaction.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think I had a conversation on Kynos with Ian McGilchrist a few months ago, and a big part of it was this conversation around the importance of constraint. That we voluntary constraint, and one form of constraint is absolutism as well, and that's part of the
Mm-hmm.
complexity of it. I have things like that for me as well. It's kind of a person's got to have a code, right? And so if your
Totally.
code has no absolutes in it, it's meaningless in a sense. And to this point about the religious belief, if your code is mainly full of absolutes, it's rigid and can't move anywhere. And it's worth noting, I think, that like many, if not, I don't know if I would say most, but because it's really hard to quantify, but like many people who have deeply held religious beliefs are also up for conversation and inquiry and being loose with it.
Totally.
Because I mean, any sense of deep spiritual connection is kind of unshakable in the face of, um, let's say, challenge if it's something, I think this is kind of a complex idea I'm trying to express, but like, so a religious experience is an experience, right? And it's not something
Mm-hmm.
you argue with or try and
Right.
like deconstruct. It's an
Right.
experience. It's when that experience then starts to be interpreted in and encoded in behavioral or moral or intellectual certainties that the problem happens, you know? And so,
Yeah.
you know, Carl Jung talked about this as like, creed is like I go to church on Sundays, but like yeah, and I kind of try and follow these things, but it's just part of the cultural milieu. And then religio, like religion, is that deep experience. And I think these are people often confuse those as well. People think
Yes.
all religion is just this kind of behavioral thing, and it's absolutely not the case.
No, and it's sometimes, the physicists and the mathematicians who kind of maybe like, because once you get down there, it's like it's a total miracle. So it's not incompatible to your point. The one like maybe asterisk I would add is like I do the of like, if it's all absolutes or if it's no absolutes. I think I can't remember which tradition this is, but like Quakers or something that have like a it's called Rumspringa, where the young people kind of like, I think it's like a designed
Amish.
season of your life. Yes, thank you. I think and I don't know it very well, but
There
it
was a
sounds
reality
like
TV
it's.
show about it. That's why I know.
Oh, really? Oh, well, then you probably know it. But it's something like it's like here, we're gonna give you a short season of no absolutes, so you can just be free for like this period of your time that like goes very well with where you are and your development. And then, but it's like a temporary period of, so I think there are maybe times when you can kind of, you know, open and close the aperture deliberately, but it's kind
Yeah.
of temporary and for in service of, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely, definitely. Yeah, it's like, you know, we've had these in many cultures, these moments of like festival, you know, and where the normal rules don't apply and we turn everything
Yeah.
upside down. The internet has become a permanent festival, which, you know, you go mad if you're in the festival too long. That's a whole other topic,
Yeah.
which we could explore at another time. But
Yeah.
Steph, any last things you wanted to kind of speak to or bring up that we haven't covered, or anything you want to kind of tell people about?
Well, I would say that if you are interested in how to integrate different perspectives, like how do you actually do that, definitely come to the wisdom session tomorrow, because that's what we'll be talking about, and you'll get to apply it to an issue that you are wrestling with or wanting to have a more kind of expanded, hopefully, understanding of. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And where can people see the faces of X
Faces of
TED Talk?
X you can find at facesofx.org. You can find me on X. Har har. I named it before Twitter changed its name, but then it actually still seemed meaningful. It's like you could also think of
Mhm.
this as Faces of Twitter.
It works. It kind of
So,
works. Yeah.
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 So you can find me on X/Twitter at Steph Lepp, and then the TED Talk is. I think if you just Google, I think it's like a long URL, but I think if you just Google TED Stephanie Leff, you'll find it. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Great
Yeah.
work on it. I'm looking forward to doing lots of fun stuff together in the coming months. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I'm going to be, now that Leviathan is over and I have some form of life back, I'm going to be
I
doing
could
more
breathe.
lives. I can breathe. I'm going to be doing more of these. So, yeah, appreciate everyone tuning in, and have a lovely day or evening or morning wherever you are in the world. And thanks again, Steph. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you
Thanks.
all.
Ciao.
Bye.